The night was darker than usual, the kind of darkness that felt heavy, almost like it had a presence of its own. The streets were quiet, the city wrapped in a blanket of uneasy silence, interrupted only by the occasional distant honk or the soft rustle of leaves swaying in the midnight breeze. Somewhere in this sprawling city, a boy named Malik walked alone, his worn-out sneakers barely making a sound against the cracked pavement. He was no stranger to the shadows, having lived most of his life on the edges, unnoticed, invisible. Malik was just 16, with sharp eyes that had seen more than they should have, and a heart tougher than most his age. Life hadn't been kind to him, but he carried on, not because he had hope, but because he had no choice. That night, he was on his way back from a part-time job he picked up at a local diner, a job that barely paid enough to buy a decent meal. But Malik didn't complain. Survival didn't leave room for complaints. As he turned onto a narrow alley shortcut he often used, the faint smell of smoke hit his nose. It wasn't the comforting kind from a fireplace. It was sharp, acrid, and wrong. His eyes darted around, and that's when he saw it. Orange flickers dancing against the dark sky, growing bolder with every second. His heart raced. Fire. Without thinking, Malik sprinted towards the glow. His instincts kicked in, fueled by something he couldn't explain. As he got closer, he realized the fire was consuming a large house, flames licking the night sky, thick black smoke pouring out of broken windows. Screams pierced the air, desperate and terrified. People were trapped inside. Malik didn't hesitate. He wasn't a firefighter, not even a trained rescuer. But something inside him refused to stand by and watch. He kicked down the front door, heat slamming into him like a wall. The smoke stung his eyes, but he pushed through. His only thought was to find the voices. He found them, a woman clutching two small children, their faces streaked with soot and fear. "Come on, we need to get out of here," Malik shouted, his voice barely audible over the roar of the fire. The woman, dazed and coughing, nodded. Malik grabbed one child in his arms, urging the woman to hold the other, and guided them through the inferno. The house groaned, threatening to collapse any second. Malik didn't stop. He didn't look back. They burst out of the burning house just as a section of the roof caved in behind them. Malik collapsed to his knees, coughing, his chest burning from the smoke. The woman clutched her children, sobbing, but alive. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. People gathered, whispering, pointing at the boy who had done what many grown men would have been too afraid to attempt. The next day, Malik woke up in a hospital bed, his head pounding, throat raw. He didn't expect any recognition. He didn't save them for fame or reward. But fate had other plans. Standing at the foot of his bed was a man in an expensive suit, his eyes filled with gratitude and something else, determination. This wasn't just any man. He was Richard Graves, one of the wealthiest CEOs in the country, the father of the family Malik had saved. "You don't know me, son, but you saved my family," Richard said, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "And I owe you more than just words." Malik tried to sit up, confused. "I didn't do it for anything," he croaked. Richard shook his head. "I know. That's exactly why I'm going to change your life." And just like that, Malik's world shifted. He had no idea what was coming next, but whatever it was bigger than anything he could have imagined. The boy who had nothing was about to be handed a fortune. But with great fortune comes great change, and not all change is easy. Malik was discharged from the hospital a few days later, his minor burns treated, and his body slowly recovering from the smoke inhalation. But what stayed with him wasn't the physical pain. It was the overwhelming sense of being thrust into a world he never belonged to. Richard Graves insisted on taking Malik to his sprawling mansion on the outskirts of the city, a place so grand it felt like stepping into a different universe. High ceilings, marble floors, and walls lined with art pieces that probably cost more than Malik had ever seen in his life. Malik felt out of place, his simple clothes and shy demeanor a stark contrast to the luxury around him. Richard introduced him to his family, his wife, Elena, who hugged Malik with tears in her eyes, and his two children, Lily and Max, who clung to their mother, still shaken but safe. They treated Malik like a hero, showering him with gratitude he didn't know how to accept. Over dinner, Richard finally revealed his plans. "I've thought a lot about this," he began, his voice calm but firm. "You saved the most important people in my life. There's no way I can ever repay you fully, but I can give you something that might change your life." Malik looked down at his plate, uncomfortable. "I don't need anything, sir." Richard smiled gently. "I know you don't. That's what makes you special. But I'm not offering this because you asked. I'm offering because you deserve it." He leaned forward. "I want to invest in your future. Not just money, but opportunities. Education, mentorship, whatever you need. Consider it a partnership. I believe you have the potential to do great things." Malik didn't know how to respond. His mind raced with doubts and questions. Why him? What did Richard see in a kid from the streets? But beneath the fear was a flicker of something new. Hope. Days turned into weeks. Malik slowly adapted to his new environment, though he never felt entirely comfortable. Richard enrolled him in a prestigious private school, where Malik struggled to fit in. The other students came from wealthy families, their lives filled with privileges Malik couldn't even fathom. They looked at him like he was an outsider, which, in truth, he was. But Malik was resilient. He poured his energy into his studies, determined not to waste the opportunity he'd been given. Richard continued to mentor him, teaching him about business, leadership, and life. Their bond grew, built on mutual respect and an unspoken understanding of what it meant to face adversity. However, not everything was as perfect as it seemed. Malik couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Richard received mysterious phone calls late at night, his face shadowed with worry afterward. Malik overheard hushed conversations about deals and risks, and then there was the man in the black car who seemed to follow Malik whenever he left the house. One evening, as Malik walked home from a tutoring session, he felt it again, the sensation of being watched. He turned quickly, catching a glimpse of a shadow disappearing around the corner. His heart pounded. Was it paranoia, or was someone really following him? Back at the mansion, Malik confronted Richard. "Is there something you're not telling me?" Richard hesitated, then sighed. "There are things about my business that are complicated, but you don't need to worry about them." But Malik did worry. The unease grew, especially when he discovered a sealed envelope hidden in Richard's office, marked with his own name. Inside was a letter that simply read, "Trust no one." Malik's world, once again, was shifting. The boy who saved a family was now entangled in a web of secrets, power, and danger. And he had no idea who to trust. The following days felt heavier, the mansion walls closing in on Malik as suspicion grew like a shadow he couldn't escape. He kept the envelope hidden, his thoughts racing with every encounter, every glance from Richard or Elena that seemed too practiced, too perfect. Even Lily and Max, whose innocent smiles once comforted him, now stirred unease. Malik found himself replaying every moment, every word, searching for hidden meanings. One evening, Richard left for an unexpected business trip, leaving Malik with Elena and the children. That night, Malik heard hushed voices outside his room. He crept to the door, pressing his ear against the cold wood. Elena's voice, low and tense, filtered through. "We can't keep this up. He's asking questions." A man's voice responded, one Malik didn't recognize. "It doesn't matter. He's just a kid. But if he digs too deep, we know what to do." Malik's breath hitched. His mind screamed to run, but his legs felt rooted. Who was that man? Why were they talking about him? The next morning, Malik acted normal, but every smile he returned felt like a mask. He decided he needed answers, and he needed them fast. Determined, Malik began investigating. He trailed Elena discreetly, discovering she met often with the man from the night before. Their meetings were brief, filled with papers exchanged and hurried whispers. Malik's instincts screamed danger. He found Richard's office locked, but his growing desperation fueled his courage. Late one night, he picked the lock using tricks he learned on the streets. Inside, he found more than he bargained for, documents linking Richard to shady business dealings, offshore accounts, and transactions that hinted at something darker. Malik's hands trembled as he sifted through the evidence. Among the papers, another note, scribbled hastily, "They're watching you." His pulse raced. Was Richard protecting him or setting him up? Malik didn't know who to trust. Every sound in the house became a threat, every shadow a potential danger. He had to get out, but not before uncovering the truth. Malik planned his escape, but as he packed his few belongings, a sharp knock echoed at his door. He froze. Elena's voice, too sweet to be genuine, drifted through. "Malik, can we talk?" His heart thundered. There was no turning back now. The boy who saved a family was about to save himself. But at what cost? The night felt heavier than usual, the mansion's grand hallways now resembling endless tunnels of shadow and silence. Malik stood frozen, his heart pounding so loudly he feared Elena might hear it through the thick wooden door. Her voice had a calmness that felt like a trap wrapped in silk. He glanced at his backpack, half-zipped with the few belongings he had managed to gather, and knew there was no time left to hesitate. Summoning his courage, Malik responded, trying to steady his voice. "Just a second." He stuffed the documents he'd found into the bag, his fingers trembling. With one deep breath, he opened the door slightly, keeping the chain lock on. Elena's face appeared in the gap, her smile stretched too thin to be genuine. "Malik, sweetheart, are you okay?" "You've been so quiet lately," she said, her eyes flickering with something Malik couldn't place, concern or calculation. "Yeah, just tired. Long day at school," he mumbled. Elena nodded slowly, but she didn't leave. Richard called. "He's worried about you too. Why don't you come downstairs? We can have some tea, talk things through." Malik's instincts screamed at him. He knew if he stepped out, he might not get another chance. "Maybe later." I just need some sleep," he replied, shutting the door gently, heart racing. He locked it tight, then quickly grabbed his bag and climbed out the window, landing softly on the grass below. The cool night air hit his face, sharp and bracing. He stayed low, using the mansion's tall hedges as cover, and slipped into the darkness, away from the house that had become a gilded cage. He made his way to the city, his mind racing with questions. Who was Richard really? What was Elena hiding? And why did he feel like he was part of something much bigger than he could understand? Malik found refuge in an old, abandoned building downtown, a place he knew from his life before all this luxury. The familiar grit of cracked tiles and dusty corners was oddly comforting. He pulled out the documents, spreading them on the dusty floor under the dim light of his phone. Bank statements, property deeds, offshore accounts, and a name that kept appearing. Victor Kane. Victor Kane. Malik didn't recognize it, but it was tied to every shady deal, every hidden transaction. He knew he had to find out who this person was. Maybe then he'd understand why his life had become a dangerous game. The next day, Malik visited an old friend, Jace, someone he trusted from his days on the streets. Jace was resourceful, with connections that could dig up information faster than any search engine. Malik showed him the documents. Jace frowned, flipping through them. Victor Kane is bad news. Heard the name before. He's tied to some big corruption cases, but no one can prove anything. If Graves is connected to him, you're in deep trouble, man. Malik's stomach tightened. I need to find him. I need answers. Jace hesitated but nodded. I might know someone who can help. They arranged a meeting with a journalist named Lila, known for exposing corruption. Lila listened intently as Malik explained everything, showing her the documents. She leaned back, her sharp eyes studying him. You're sitting on a bombshell, kid. But this isn't just about money. It's about power. Graves isn't just a CEO. He's part of something bigger. And if Victor Kane is involved, it's dangerous. Malik felt the weight of her words. But he couldn't back down now. What do we do? He asked. We expose them. But we need more proof. Determined, Malik agreed to help Lila dig deeper. They followed leads, met with informants, piecing together a puzzle that painted a terrifying picture. Graves was laundering money for Victor Kane, using his company as a front for illegal activities. and Malik was the loose end they needed to tie up. One night, while Malik and Lila reviewed evidence in her small apartment, Malik noticed something strange outside the window. A black car parked across the street, headlights off, but engine running. His heart raced. "They found me," he whispered. Lila looked out, her face pale. "We need to move." They grabbed the documents, but before they could leave, the door burst open. Men in black suits stormed in. Malik and Lila darted out the fire escape, adrenaline fueling their escape. They raced through alleyways, the sounds of footsteps chasing them, echoing in the night. Malik's lungs burned as they finally lost their pursuers, hiding in the shadows of an old parking garage. "We can't keep running," Malik gasped. "We need to end this." Lila nodded, determination in her eyes. "Then we hit them where it hurts." They planned to leak the evidence to the media. But as they prepared for the biggest risk of their lives, Malik received a message from an unknown number. "If you value your life, meet me at the old pier. Alone. R.G. Richard Graves." Malik knew it was a trap. But it was also his chance to confront the man who had turned his life upside down. The tension was unbearable, his mind racing with what-ifs. But he had to go. The night of the meeting, Malik stood at the edge of the old pier, the waves crashing below, the salty air thick with tension. A black car approached, and Richard stepped out, alone, his face shadowed by the dim streetlight. "I thought you were smarter than this," Richard said, his voice calm, but laced with menace. Malik didn't flinch. "Why me? Why bring me into this?" Richard sighed, stepping closer. "You were never just a boy who saved my family. You were a problem I had to manage. But now you're a threat." Malik's fists clenched. "I know everything. About Victor Kane. About your dirty deals." Richard smiled coldly. "Then you know how this ends." Suddenly, more figures emerged from the shadows. Malik's heart raced. But before panic could set in, headlights flashed from the distance, and police sirens pierced the air. Lila had called the cops, sharing the evidence just in time. The scene erupted in chaos. Malik ducked as shots were fired, running for cover. The pier became a battleground, the noise deafening, fear gripping his heart. But amidst the chaos, Malik saw Richard trying to escape. Summoning every ounce of courage, Malik chased him, their footsteps pounding against the wooden planks. Richard turned, aiming a gun, but Malik tackled him, the weapon skidding across the pier. They struggled, fists flying, anger boiling over. Malik fought not just for survival, but for justice, for the life stolen from him. As the police closed in, Malik pinned Richard down, his breath ragged, his heart pounding with triumph and fear. But it wasn't over yet. The truth was out, but the cost of exposing it was a price Malik never expected to pay. And as he looked into Richard's defeated eyes, he realized the battle had only just begun. The police had Richard Graves in custody, his hands cuffed behind his back, his face a mixture of rage and disbelief. Malik stood nearby, bruised and breathless, watching the man who had once seemed untouchable reduced to nothing more than a criminal. The flashing red and blue lights reflected in Malik's eyes, but instead of relief, a strange emptiness settled in his chest. It was supposed to be over, but something felt wrong. As the officers led Richard to a patrol car, he turned his head slightly, locking eyes with Malik. A cold, mocking smile crept across his face. "You think this ends with me?" he whispered, just loud enough for Malik to hear. The words echoed in Malik's mind, planting a seed of doubt. That night, as he sat in Lila's apartment, replaying everything in his head, the feeling grew. Richard was just a piece of the puzzle. The true threat was still out there, hidden in the shadows. The next morning, the news was everywhere. CEO Richard Graves arrested for fraud and corruption. Malik thought it would bring some peace, but instead, it felt like the calm before a storm. His phone buzzed with messages from unknown numbers, threats veiled in cryptic words. Lila paced the room, uneasy. "They're not going to let this go," she muttered. Graves was connected to powerful people. People who don't like loose ends. Malik nodded, his jaw tight. "We need to find Victor Kane." But Kane wasn't hiding. That afternoon, a video surfaced online, leaked to every major news outlet. It showed Kane in a luxurious office, his face clear, his voice steady as he addressed the camera. Richard Graves was a disappointment, Kane said smoothly. But this young man, Malik, he's proven himself resourceful.
Brave.
Unfortunately, bravery doesn't guarantee safety. Malik's blood ran cold. It wasn't just a threat, it was an invitation. Kane wanted him to know he was being watched. Within hours, Lila's apartment was ransacked while they were out gathering information. Files were stolen, computers smashed, and a single message left scrawled on the wall. Stop digging. But Malik couldn't stop. He felt responsible now, not just for himself, but for exposing the truth. They traced Kane's operations through hidden accounts, shell companies, and shady contacts. Every step brought them closer to answers and deeper into danger. Then, the twist Malik never saw coming. Jace, his trusted friend, disappeared. Malik found Jace's apartment door ajar, signs of struggle evident. Overturned furniture, broken glass, and bloodstains. Panic gripped Malik's heart. There was no ransom note, no message. Just silence. It felt personal, like Kane was striking where it hurt most. Desperate, Malik reached out to an unexpected ally, Detective Harris, the officer who had arrested Graves. Harris had always seemed indifferent, but now, faced with undeniable corruption within the system, he agreed to help. Kane isn't just a criminal, Harris said, reviewing the evidence. He's a ghost with friends in high places. If we're going after him, we need to be smart. They formed a fragile alliance, gathering a small team of trusted people. The plan was risky: infiltrate one of Kane's known locations, a warehouse front for his illegal operations. Malik insisted on going, despite Lila's protests. The night of the operation, tension hung thick in the air. Malik's heart raced as they approached the warehouse, hidden under the cover of darkness. Armed with nothing but determination and a hidden wire, Malik slipped inside. The warehouse was a labyrinth of crates and shadows. Malik moved quietly, his breath shallow. He spotted figures in the distance, men armed and alert. But then he saw something that made his blood freeze. Jace, tied to a chair, bruised and barely conscious. Malik didn't think. He acted. Creeping closer, he managed to untie Jace, whispering urgently, "We're getting out of here." But it was a trap. Alarms blared, lights flooded the space, and armed men surrounded them. Victor Kane emerged from the shadows, impeccably dressed, his face calm and composed. "Brave as always," Kane said, his voice dripping with arrogance. "But foolish." Malik stood tall, hiding his fear. "You won't get away with this." Kane chuckled. "I already have." Before Malik could respond, shots rang out. Harris and his team had arrived. Chaos erupted. Malik dragged Jace to cover, dodging bullets and shouting instructions. The battle was fierce, the warehouse a storm of noise and fear. In the middle of the chaos, Malik faced Kane again, this time with nothing left to lose. They fought, a brutal clash of fists and fury. Malik's anger fueled him, every punch a release of the fear and pain Kane had caused. But just as Malik gained the upper hand, Kane pulled a hidden gun. Time seemed to slow. Malik braced for the worst. A shot fired. Kane's expression shifted from triumph to shock. He collapsed, revealing Lila behind him, gun trembling in her hands. Silence followed, heavy and deafening. The battle was over. But as Malik looked at Kane's lifeless body, he knew this victory came with a price. The scars, the loss, the darkness, they would linger. And yet, amidst the wreckage, Malik found something unexpected: strength. Not just from survival, but from standing up, fighting back, and refusing to be a pawn in someone else's game. The warehouse fell into an eerie silence, the sharp scent of gunpowder lingering in the air. Malik stood over Kane's lifeless body, his chest heaving, adrenaline still coursing through his veins. Lila's hand trembled as she lowered the gun, her eyes wide with a mix of shock and relief. Jace, though battered, managed a faint smile, grateful to be alive. The aftermath, was a blur. Police sirens wailed in the distance, and soon officers flooded the scene, arresting the remaining henchmen. Malik, Lila, and Jace were escorted outside, the cool night air a stark contrast to the chaos they had just escaped. Detective Harris approached, his face stern but filled with a hint of admiration. "You did good," Harris said quietly, clapping Malik on the shoulder. Malik nodded, though the weight of everything that had happened felt heavier than any words of praise could lift.
They had survived. Kane was gone.
The nightmare was over. Or so Malik thought. Weeks passed, and life slowly began to resemble something normal. Malik found a sense of peace he hadn't felt in a long time. The media had hailed him as a hero, his bravery celebrated in headlines and interviews. Lila stood by his side, their bond stronger than ever, forged through fire and fear. But one evening, as Malik sat alone in his modest apartment, flipping through a stack of old letters Kane had left behind, he found something unsettling, a sealed envelope marked with his name. Curiosity outweighed caution. He opened it. Inside was a simple note, written in Kane's precise handwriting. "You think this ends with me?" Chills ran down Malik's spine. Along with the note was a flash drive. Hesitant but unable to resist, he plugged it into his laptop. A video file appeared, titled Legacy. The video began with Kane, alive and smug, speaking directly to the camera. "If you're watching this, Malik, it means I'm dead. But death is just a door. I left it open." Kane's cold smile stretched wider. "You thought you stopped me, but I was never the only one. There's more. Bigger than you can imagine." The screen shifted to images, documents, faces, places. Names of powerful figures intertwined with dark dealings. Kane's network was vast, his influence stretching beyond what Malik had uncovered. Malik's heart raced. It wasn't over. Kane had orchestrated a web of corruption so deep, his death was just the beginning. Malik realized he was now entangled in something far greater, a shadow war hidden behind the facade of everyday life. Determination replaced fear. Malik couldn't walk away, not after everything. He reached for his phone, dialing Lila. "It's not over," he whispered when she answered. "I know," she replied softly. "I'm with you." As Malik looked out the window into the city lights, he felt the familiar surge of purpose. The fight wasn't finished. The real battle had just begun. The days after Malik discovered the flash drive were filled with restless nights and unanswered questions. The revelation of Kane's expansive network had opened a door Malik never wanted to walk through, but he knew he had no choice. The fight wasn't just about Kane anymore, it was about dismantling the system he left behind. Malik and Lila met in a small, quiet cafe, away from the prying eyes of the world. They spread out the documents, piecing together the web of connections that stretched across cities, corporations, and even government offices. Every name they uncovered was another thread in the tangled mess Kane had orchestrated. "We can't do this alone," Lila said, her voice low but steady. Malik nodded. They reached out to Detective Harris, who, despite his initial reluctance, couldn't ignore the gravity of what they had found. Harris assembled a small team of trusted officers, people who hadn't been compromised by Kane's influence. Months passed in a blur of covert meetings, coded messages, and undercover operations. They exposed corrupt officials, dismantled illegal operations, and shone a light on the dark corners where Kane's legacy tried to hide. The media followed their progress, turning Malik into an unlikely symbol of resilience and justice. But victory wasn't without cost. They faced threats, betrayals, and moments where giving up seemed easier than pushing forward. Jace struggled with his trauma, haunted by the days he was held captive. Lila battled her fears, worried that every step forward brought them closer to danger. And Malik carried the weight of it all, driven by a sense of duty that often left him feeling alone. One evening, after another successful operation, Malik stood on the rooftop of his apartment building, looking out over the city. The skyline was beautiful, but beneath its glow lay the scars of battles fought in the shadows. Lila joined him, her presence a comforting anchor. "Do you think it's really over?" she asked softly. Malik thought for a moment before answering. It'll never be completely over. But we've made a difference. That has to count for something. As the city breathed below them, Malik realized that while the fight had changed him, it had also revealed who he truly was. Not just a boy from the streets who saved a CEO's family, but someone who refused to be defined by his past or the darkness he faced. Eventually, the headlines shifted. The world moved on. But Malik's life was forever altered. He found peace in small things: morning coffee with Lila, laughter with Jace, quiet moments of reflection. He never sought recognition, only the knowledge that he had done what was right. Years later, Malik walked through a bustling city park, now a father himself. His child ran ahead, carefree and full of life. Malik smiled, feeling the warmth of the sun and the quiet satisfaction that came from knowing he had helped create a better world for the next generation. As he watched his child play, Malik understood that true victory wasn't in defeating villains or exposing corruption. It was in the life he built, the people he loved, and the courage to keep going no matter the odds. And in that simple, beautiful moment, the story of Malik's journey found its end, not with a battle, but with peace.